The late autumn wind carried a sharp chill, and the scent of disinfectant clung heavily to the air in the halls of St. Mary's Medical Center in Trenton. I stood at my mother's bedside, heart clenched at the sight of her frail frame. She'd only been in the hospital for 3 days, but she looked noticeably thinner. She'd always been slight, but now it seemed like there was nothing left of her but bones and paper-thin skin. Her eyes had sunk deep into their sockets. It hurt just to look at her. "Mom, are you feeling any better?" I asked softly, taking her cold hand in mine, careful not to squeeze too hard. Her fingers were all bone and knuckle, but I couldn't help tightening my grip just a little, as if I could hold her here with me that way. She gave a slight shake of her head, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Alexis, sweetheart, stop spending money on me. I'm old. Treatment or no treatment, it won't make a difference." "Don't say that, Mom." I cut her off quickly, my throat tightening. "Please just focus on getting better. I'll figure out the money. I've still got my job and I've been saving a little each month." Just then the door swung open and Nurse Jessica walked in briskly, her expression tense. "Alexis Foster," she said, "your mother's hospital bill needs an immediate payment. We're still short $12,000 and any more delay could disrupt her treatment schedule." I glanced at the 4 drips slowly ticking away above her bed, then looked down at my mother's closed eyes. Tightening the strap of my shoulder bag, I nodded. "Hey, I'll go home and get the money now. Jessica, please, just keep an eye on her for me." "Of course," Jessica replied with a quick nod. "But try to come back soon. The doctor's making his rounds tonight." By the time I rushed home, the sky was ablaze with the colors of dusk, rich reds and burnt oranges spilling across the horizon. I pushed open the front door to find the house shrouded in darkness. Feeling along the wall, I flipped the switch and as the light clicked on, I heard a noise coming from the kitchen. A familiar smell drifted through the air. Microwaved pizza. "Evan, is that you?" I called out as I walked toward the bedroom, but no one answered. I went straight for the nightstand drawer, where I always kept my debit card. But when I pulled it open, the card was gone. My stomach dropped. Frantically, I started digging through the drawer. Pens, receipts, old chargers, everything scattered across the floor in a mess of panic. But the card was nowhere to be found. "What are you looking for?" Gary's voice cut through the silence as he appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a slice of steaming pizza balanced on a plate. The scent of processed cheese and reheated pepperoni filled the room, but it only made my stomach churn. His expression was as cold as ever, disinterested, detached. "My mom's hospital bill is due," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Have you seen my debit card?" Panic was already crawling up my spine. With Gary, anything involving money always came with strings, and usually knots tight enough to strangle. "You mean this?" He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out the familiar blue card, spinning it between his fingers like it was some kind of toy. "I was just about to talk to you about it. After the layoffs a few months back, I hadn't been able to land a new job. Gary had played the supportive husband at first, saying, 'Maybe it's good you take a break.' But it didn't take long before that break became a leash. That card, my last shred of independence, turned into the only thing he had left to control me with. Me. I went from a woman with a steady income to someone counting quarters beside the stove. "Give it to me, Gary. I need to get back to the hospital," I said, reaching out, urgency twisting in my chest. The doctor would be making his rounds soon. We were out of time. He took a step back and smirked, that familiar curl of his lip that always made my skin crawl. "Alexis, your mom's what, 70-something? What's the point in throwing more money at this? She's old. When it's time to go, it's time. You've been spending on her for years and what has it done? She's still sick. It's a waste." His words hit like a dull blade, cutting deep and slow. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Gary." My voice cracked. "She's my mother. How can you even say that? That's my money. You had no right to take it." "Yours." He tossed the pizza plate to the floor with a loud clang. The sound made me jump. "You don't make enough to support this household and now you want to throw what little you have into a black hole? Don't be stupid. That money's for Evan. He needs a down payment for his future home." "You heartless bastard." I lunged for the card, my mind a blur with only one thought. My mom was lying in that hospital bed waiting for this money. But he shoved me aside without hesitation. I slammed against the wall, a sharp pain tearing through my lower back. "Are you insane?" he roared. You're not getting that money. You're a damn fool. That disease your mom has. It's a pit you can't fill. You think she'll pull through if you just throw a few more bucks at it? Look at the Wilsons next door. His mom got treatment for a year and she still died. All that money gone. Clenching my teeth, I pushed myself up, bracing against the wall. Tears streamed down my face. If anything happens to my mom, Gary, I swear I'll never forgive you. Suit yourself, he said flatly, grabbing his pizza again. He walked out without a glance back, casually slipping the card into his pocket like he'd won something. Oh, and Alexis, he said over his shoulder. You breathe one word of this to Evan and I swear you'll regret it. And then he was gone. I sank to the floor, shaking, the weight of everything crashing over me like a tidal wave. The room spun. My limbs felt heavy. All I could do was sit there, staring at the empty doorway, feeling like the air had been sucked from my lungs. That night, I stayed at the hospital, sitting vigil by my mother's bedside. She slept fitfully, slipping in and out of restless dreams, while the fluorescent lights in the room flickered overhead, sometimes bright, sometimes dim. I didn't sleep at all. I sat stiff in the cold plastic chair, eyes wide open, tears dropping silently onto the back of my hand, one after another as moments from the past, years of swallowing my pride and biting my tongue, looped endlessly in my mind. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that things took a turn. A nurse came in to check vitals, only to find my mother's condition had suddenly worsened. She needs emergency surgery, immediately, the on-call physician said, his voice brisk, his expression grim. But her previous balance hasn't been cleared, and this next procedure will cost around $30,000. I stood outside the ER, gripping my phone so tightly my hands were trembling. My brain felt like a fogged-up mirror. Nothing clear, just fragments of fear and panic. But I knew one thing, I had no other choice. Fingers shaking, I dialed Gary's number. It rang several times before he finally picked up. The background noise hit me first. Rowdy laughter, the slap of playing cards on a table, the unmistakable clink of glasses. A poker game most likely, and judging by the ruckus, not his first drink of the night. What do you want? He slurred, irritation thick in his voice, the smell of alcohol practically seeping through the phone. Gary, please, my voice cracked. Mom needs surgery right now. I'm begging you, give me back the card. Just this once. I swear I'll never ask you for anything again. I didn't even get to finish before his reply hit me like a bucket of ice water, freezing me to my core. You're too late. The money's gone, he said like he was talking about loose change, not everything I had left. I lost it all at the table last night. I stood frozen in the corridor, my phone slipping in my hand, Gary's words echoing in my ears. Laughter and glass clinks spilled through the line as he went on, totally unfazed. You what? The words barely came out, like my throat was closing around them. I said the money's gone. He spoke slower this time, adding insult to injury with that smug, mocking tone. You really thought your little side hustle savings were gonna save her? That wasn't even enough for a decent vacation, Alexis. I stared at the glowing sign above the OR doors, prepping for surgery, and felt something inside me splinter. You used my mom's surgery money to gamble? I shouted, my voice cracking as it echoed down the empty corridor. He laughed. Get real, Alexis. I'm the man of this house. You're a part-timer making less than $4,000 a month. You think you can tell me how to use my money? My breathing quickened, each inhale sharper than the last, like I was trapped in a sealed box with no air. How much do you owe? I asked, quieter this time, not angry anymore, just hollow, desperate for some kind of answer. He hesitated, then replied with a flippant, that's none of your business. But let's be honest, your mom's not gonna make it much longer. Why throw good money after bad? If I can flip it at the table, maybe we actually come out ahead. My fingers slipped. The phone hit the floor with a dull thud. I don't remember bending down to pick it up. I don't remember walking back toward the room. I just remember standing there outside the surgical ward as the nurse asked for my signature and the payment. Like I hadn't just watched my entire life crumble in a single phone call. Miss Foster. Jessica came over quietly, her voice gentle, eyes full of concern. We really need to move on this. The doctors can't wait much longer. I know, I croaked. My voice barely registered as mine. My fingertips felt like ice. I stared down at my shoes, and for a moment, the ground seemed to sway beneath me. I knew Gary. Knew exactly what kind of man he was. He'd never give me a cent for my mother. And God only knew how deep he was in. When he said flip it, I realized, this wasn't over. There might be more debts. More people. And sooner or later they'd come knocking. I couldn't let myself spiral. I forced a breath into my lungs. Jessica, I said, looking up at her, eyes rimmed with tears but locked steady on hers. Is there any way I could get just a few more days? I swear I'll find a way to pay. She hesitated, reading my face, then gave a reluctant nod. I'll see what I can do. I thanked her, then turned and slipped back into my mother's room. She was still asleep, her breathing shallow, her lips twitching slightly with every exhale. Her face was pale, paler than the sheets tucked around her, and her hand lay limp on top of the blanket. I reached for it and held it gently, the dry, paper-thin skin brushing against mine. I never thought I'd live to see the day I couldn't come up with enough money to save my own mother's life. And the man who once promised he'd take care of me for the rest of mine was somewhere in a smoky room laughing with gamblers, drinking whiskey, and burning down every last hope I had left. The hospital lights had dimmed to a soft amber glow. Outside the window, the wind rustled the trees, their branches scraping gently against the glass like fingernails on an old wooden door. I sat beside my mother, still holding her cold, fragile hand in mine, but the emotions I'd tried so hard to suppress finally broke loose. Silent tears streamed down my cheeks, landing on the parchment-thin skin of her hand. In that quiet, I started to see it all more clearly. The years, the choices, the way I had slowly disappeared inside my own life. Over 2 decades of marriage, I'd convinced myself to endure. To keep the peace. To protect Evan. To preserve some illusion of a complete family. I told myself to look away when Gary spent nights out drinking, gambling, doing God knows what with God knows who. I swallowed the insults, the control, the cold silence. I told myself to be the bigger person. For Evan. For the marriage. For the life we were supposed to have. But now he could stand there, utterly indifferent, while my mother's life hung by a thread, and still call it a waste to save her. That's when it finally hit me. This wasn't a marriage. It was a prison I'd been trained to decorate. My phone buzzed on the tray table, the screen glowing in the darkness. A number I didn't recognize. My stomach tightened with unease, but I answered. Mrs. Foster? A male voice said. Unfamiliar. Clipped. Laced with poorly disguised impatience. You're Gary Foster's wife, right? Ryan Miller. I co-signed a loan for him last night. My heart lurched. What's this about? Your husband lost 30 grand at the poker table. Still owes another 20. He told us you'd cover some of it today. Look, I'd suggest you talk to your husband, unless you'd rather we handle it directly. Wait, what do you mean handle it? I shot to my feet, the panic rising like floodwater in my throat. We're professionals. We don't rough people up. But rules only work as long as people respect them. You've got until noon tomorrow to figure it out. He hung up. 5 seconds. That was all it took to drop me into a different reality. I stood in the doorway, frozen, my lungs aching under the weight in my chest. Gary hadn't just gambled away my last paycheck. He'd racked up debt with loan sharks. The kind of men who didn't make polite house calls. Me. I didn't even have enough money to pay for my mother's surgery, let alone bail out the man who was dragging us all under. You okay? Jessica appeared beside me again, her soft voice breaking through the fog in my head. Her eyes were kind but full of concern. I nodded automatically, my voice dull. Yeah. I'm just tired. That was a lie, of course. I wasn't tired. I was terrified. Cornered. But right then, fear didn't matter. Exhaustion didn't matter. Even heartbreak had to wait. Because by morning I'd have to become someone else entirely. Someone who could fight back. Back at my mother's bedside, her breathing was faint but steady. She remained deep in sleep, unaware of the chaos and desperation swallowing her daughter whole. I sank into the chair, my hand pressed to my forehead, thoughts tangled like a knot I couldn't undo. Mom, I whispered, barely audible, I don't know how much longer I can hold on. Her fingers twitched slightly. I leaned in, heart racing, but she was only shifting in her sleep before settling again. I stared at her face, the lines deeper now, her cheeks hollowed, but in my mind I saw her as she once was. That vibrant woman who used to hum while she cooked, whose laughter filled every room, who never raised her voice at me, not once. She was the kind of mother who always stood behind me even when the world turned away. who gave everything quietly without expecting anything in return. And now I couldn't even give her a fair shot at staying alive. I wiped my tears, drew a long breath and forced myself to stand. My legs were still shaky, my head a storm of worry, but one thing had crystallized in all the noise. I couldn't wait anymore. I couldn't retreat. Not now. Mrs. Foster, I spoke with the hospital director this morning, Jessica told me, her expression tight. If the initial payment isn't received by noon today, the surgery will be cancelled. I'm sorry, that's the longest extension I could get. Her words echoed in my head like a distant thunderclap. I nodded, numb, though her voice kept ringing in my ears. But what could I do? I'd already pawned the last pieces of jewelry my mother left me, sentimental things she'd passed down when I got married. All it bought me was $500. I tried Gary again. His phone was still off. He'd vanished like a ghost, leaving only wreckage behind. In desperation, I thought of Lily, an old coworker from years back. We'd hustled through long nights together, stood side by side through tight deadlines and tougher bosses. She'd moved up, was middle management at some firm now. Doing well, or so it seemed. I texted her and she called back within minutes. Oh God, Alexis. I want to help, really I do. But we just closed on a house. Money's super tight right now, you know how it is. Her voice faltered under the weight of polite guilt. I forced a laugh. It's okay, I get it. But even as I said it, my eyes burned. Then I tried Mrs. Green, our old neighbor. She and Mom used to sit on the porch together, drinking sweet tea and trading gossip. She'd always been kind, the kind of woman who called you sweetheart, and remembered your birthday. I stood on her porch with sweat slicking my palms, swallowing every ounce of pride. Oh, honey, she said, voice soft with sympathy. I wish I could help. But my husband just had surgery and the bills nearly crushed us. We're still digging ourselves out. She placed a warm hand on mine, gave it a squeeze and sighed. Stay strong, sweetheart. That's all you can do. I nodded, lips curled in a smile too tight to be real. But the moment I turned away and stepped off her porch, the tears returned, hot, silent, relentless. Kept trying. I called, texted, knocked on doors I hadn't approached in years. Each time hoping for a miracle, each time walking away with nothing but kind eyes and gentle rejections. Sympathy wasn't enough. Not when time was bleeding out with every passing second. By the time I returned to the hospital, it was nearly noon. We can't hold the bed any longer, the woman from the billing office said once again. If the payment isn't made, we'll have to release the room tonight. I stood in the main lobby, clutching the invoice in my hand like it was a one-way ticket to the edge of despair. My vision blurred at the edges. The world felt far away, muffled, like I was sinking into something I couldn't claw my way out of. Mrs. Foster? Jessica's voice pulled me back. I was sitting on a bench in the corridor, hands like ice, the weight of that obscene number still echoing in my mind. She crouched in front of me, her eyes searching mine. I might know a way to help. I looked up, barely daring to believe I'd heard her right. What do you mean? She hesitated, glancing around before speaking more quietly. Our hospital partners with a charitable relief fund. It's run by the Community Medical Foundation. It's designed to assist families in crisis, when there's no insurance coverage and urgent care is needed. My heart clenched so tightly I could hardly breathe. Can I apply for it? I asked, almost afraid the question itself might jinx the answer. You can, she nodded. The application is detailed and the approval process can take time, but, she paused, I've already spoken to your attending physician. He's agreed to write a recommendation letter to expedite the review. I opened my mouth but nothing came out. I was too stunned to speak. The words of gratitude were there, tangled somewhere between disbelief and exhaustion. Jessica reached out and gently touched my shoulder. You've done everything you could. We've all seen it. Now let us try to help. I nodded, blinking back tears. Thank you. Thank you so much. No more words. Just quiet resolve. She handed me the application packet and I held it as if it were something sacred. Then I began to fill it out slowly and deliberately, each answer like peeling back another layer of vulnerability. Household income. Duration of unemployment. Remaining assets. Dependents. Monthly expenses. Every number felt like a confession. The kind of truths I'd never wanted to admit, not even to myself. Now scrawled in black ink across a piece of paper that might mean the difference between life and death. When I reached the signature line, I froze. For a moment my hand trembled above the page. Then I steadied it and signed my name with everything I had left. The next morning the hospital's billing department called me in. The preliminary review had gone through. The charitable fund would cover 75% of the surgery costs. The remaining balance could be paid off in installments after the operation. All I had to do was sign the confirmation and they'd begin prepping for surgery. I stood by the window holding the approval notice in my hands, and for a long moment I didn't know what to feel. Just yesterday I thought I'd hit the end of the road. That there was no way out, no lifeline left. But here, when I was at my lowest, somewhere had lit a small lamp in the dark. When I returned to the room, Mom was still resting peacefully. I sat beside her, wrapping her frail hand in mine and whispering, "Mom, the money's taken care of. You've got a chance now. Real hope." She didn't stir, didn't speak, but I thought I saw a tiny flicker at the corner of her eye. The surgery was scheduled for the following afternoon. The doctors warned me her condition was complicated and her body fragile, but with proper pre-op stabilization, there was still a chance. Not a promise, but a chance. That night I didn't sleep. My heart pounded like a drum, every tick of the clock sounding like a verdict waiting to fall. The next day I stood outside the operating room, nervously twisting the hem of my shirt in my hands. Before stepping inside, the surgeon placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder and said, "Try to relax. We're going to do everything we can." I nodded, blinking back tears. This wasn't the time to cry. Not yet. First she had to make it through. Those 4 hours were the longest of my life. I sat on the bench, watching the sun stretch across the hallway tiles in the morning, and then fade slowly into the late-day shadows. My mind was blank. I didn't even notice when my phone died. When the lead surgeon finally stepped out, I shot to my feet so fast I nearly lost balance. "The operation went fairly well," he said. "Considering her age and condition, she pulled through better than expected. The next few days will be critical. She'll need close monitoring during recovery." I nodded again and again, the words, "Thank you," caught in my throat, swelling, too big to push through. When they wheeled her out, I followed beside the stretcher. Her face looked paler than ever, but her breathing was steady. The monitor showed a strong, rhythmic beat. For the first time in weeks I exhaled. That night I didn't leave her side. I watched as she slowly came out of anesthesia, her eyelids fluttering open like moth wings. Her gaze was cloudy, unfocused. Her voice so faint I had to lean in to hear. "Alexis." "I'm here, Mom." I grabbed her hand, tears welling again, but not from fear this time. Her lips moved again, barely forming the words. "Sweetheart. You have to live your own life." I squeezed her hand, my voice cracking. "I will, Mom. I promise." She closed her eyes again, drifting back to sleep. And that night I didn't cry. Because I finally understood, no one was coming to save me. I couldn't rely on Gary. Not friends. Not neighbors. Not even luck. I only had myself now. And I had to be strong. Not for anyone else. But for me. But my mother's recovery didn't go the way we'd hoped. In fact, it was worse than any of us had feared. Her body was already so frail. In the days following surgery, she was racked with fevers that refused to break, waves of infection that came and went like tides. Her blood pressure swung wildly out of control, forcing the doctors to adjust her medications every few hours. They told me the operation itself had been successful, but the complications, they were slowly tearing her apart. I barely left her side. Each time she opened her eyes, I was there, clutching her hand and whispering calm into the chaos. When she slipped into unconsciousness, I held it together with everything I had, swallowing my fear so she wouldn't see me fall apart. Then came the delirium. She started to mumble, calling me by my childhood nickname, murmuring for my father who'd passed away years ago. Sometimes she reached for people who weren't there. Other times she stared straight ahead like she saw something I couldn't. I tried to sleep in the hospital chair beside her but never truly rested. The moment a machine beeped, even once, I shot awake and sprinted for the nurses. My nerves lived on the edge of shattering. I begged the universe, anyone, for more time. Just a few more days. Just a little longer with her. But hope ended on a rainy night. It started just after I changed her bag. She began coughing, hard, gasping for breath, her chest heaving as her oxygen levels plunged. Alarms blared, monitors screamed, and the room flooded with nurses and doctors. I was ushered out into the hallway. From the other side of the door I heard frantic footsteps, clipped orders, the strained urgency of people trying to buy time from death. My heart felt like it was being pulled tighter and tighter by invisible wires, until I couldn't breathe. 30 minutes passed. Then the door opened. The doctor's face said everything before his words even landed. "I'm so sorry," she went peacefully. "We did everything we could." I stood there rooted to the floor. No scream. No tears. Not even a breath. It was as if the world had frozen, and the only sound left was the dull hum of fluorescent lights buzzing above my head. We held a quiet funeral. No relatives. No friends. Just me alone standing at her grave, adjusting the soft sky-blue sweater she loved most, folding it gently in the cold wind as if she might still need it. Jessica came. She lit a small candle and stood beside me without saying much. Just her presence, steady and quiet. "She would have been proud of you," she said softly. I gave a small nod. And finally, the tears came. Evan showed up on the day of the funeral. He called me from the parking lot, said he'd just arrived. I walked out quickly, and from a distance I could already see him leaning against his car, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You came," I started to call out, but before I could finish he scanned me from head to toe. My black dress, my hollow cheeks, the exhaustion carved into every part of me. "What did you do to yourself?" he said as if scolding a stranger. No sympathy. No warmth. Just judgment. I froze for a second, then gave a weary, bitter smile. "Your grandmother just passed. I've been at the hospital every day." "I know," he said coolly. "I saw the article, the charity fund list. Your name's on it." It took me a beat to register what he meant. The aid I received, it had made the news. "You're embarrassed?" I asked, my voice suddenly sharp. "I just think," he replied, "if you didn't have a job you could have told me. But no, you wanted to carry the whole thing on your own. Like you're some kind of hero or what?" His words hit like a slap. "Evan, it's not about being noble," I said, trying to steady my voice. "I didn't know what else to do. You're away at school, I didn't want to burden you. I just..." "So you handled it alone and made it public that we needed charity? Do you even realize what that says about me? What it says about you?" I snapped, the pain in my chest igniting like fire. "I fought tooth and nail to save my mother's life. And you're standing here upset because it might have hurt your image." He looked at me with the same cold detachment. "You've changed, Mom. You weren't always this confrontational." "I haven't changed," I shot back. "You just never saw things as they were." He shook his head. "I've got somewhere to be. Let's just leave it at that." "That's it." I stared at him. "You're not even going to see her grave?" He paused, one hand on the car door. "You spent years throwing every penny into saving her. I always thought it was pointless. You should have saved that money for me. I'm the one who still has a future. But whatever. You were never there for me when I needed you." He opened the door, half inside now. "I left a wreath in the back seat. You can take it up for me." And just like that he drove off. I stood in the parking lot, the air heavy and still like the sky itself had caved in. But I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, it did. It cracked something deep and old inside me. But the tears didn't come because I finally understood. Some pain isn't meant to be shed in front of those who don't deserve it. Some tears aren't for begging or proving. They're for healing, and healing doesn't need an audience. I didn't chase after him. I didn't try to explain myself or defend what I'd done, or ask him why he was so cruel. I just went home. Sat down on the old couch, alone in the stillness. The house was quiet. The yellowed chandelier above me hummed faintly, a relic from a life I no longer recognized. And in that moment my mind was crystal clear. This ends now. Ever since the day my mother was admitted to the hospital, I had been thrust into a war I never chose. A war without exit, without mercy. But now I was done being the woman who only knew how to beg, endure, and cry. It was time to fight back. Not with screaming matches or dramatic confrontations. No. This time I would be calm, calculated, and relentless. I was going to slice through the rotting carcass of this marriage with surgical precision. Gary had gambled away my savings, hijacked my paycheck, and tightened his grip on every inch of my life. He didn't just destroy our marriage. He erased me in the process, turned me into a shadow haunting the corners of my own home. But now, I was done disappearing. Piece by piece I was going to take back everything he thought he could keep. I started digging, through old bank statements, electronic invoices, cryptic debt messages from payday lenders. I found voice recordings I'd made during nights he thought I was too numb to fight back, his venomous rants caught in the dark. This wasn't revenge. This was truth, and I was dragging it out into the light. I once gave everything to save a family. Now I'd give just as much to save myself. A few days later, Gary showed up, storming into the house with a few strange men trailing behind him. He barked orders like a foreman on a construction site. Move it that way. No, the big one goes in the living room. He turned and shouted at me, waving a hand as they lugged an absurdly large flat-screen TV through the doorway. Out of the way, Alexis. I paid for this myself. I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching silently as they dragged in cables, boxes, and cheap bravado. Gary turned, smug and loud. See that? He said, patting the box like it was a trophy. This is what it means to enjoy life. Maybe if you stopped moping around like some tragic heroine, you'd understand. I didn't respond. I just pulled out my phone and took a photo. Him posing with his new toy, his voice loud and reckless in the background. Every word, every purchase, every slip of arrogance. Evidence for the folder I was building. Evidence for the court. The next morning I met with my attorney Claire. She was sharp and focused, with wireframe glasses and a navy trench coat that matched the quiet authority in her voice. As she flipped through the documents and recordings I'd brought, she nodded slowly. You've done your homework, she said. These documents support a strong case for both emotional abuse and financial exploitation. We're ready to move forward. I'm not just looking to get out, I said, my voice even. I want what's mine. My dignity. My rights. All of it. Claire looked up and smiled, assured. We'll file on 3 fronts. Marital asset division, control of financial accounts, and psychological abuse. I'll also petition for an emergency asset freeze. I met her gaze. I want this handled cleanly. Precisely. No mess. Her lips curved into a confident smile. Don't worry. Men like Gary always think they're untouchable, until someone like me proves them wrong. That night back home, Gary could sense something had shifted. He waited until dinner was over before speaking, his tone suspicious. What have you been up to lately? He asked, narrowing his eyes. You're acting different. I kept my voice flat. I met a friend for coffee. Cut the crap, Alexis. He leaned back in his chair, smirking. You think you can pull one over on me? Don't forget, this house is in my name. That bed you sleep in? It isn't even yours. I set my fork down gently and looked him straight in the eye. You'll find out soon enough that you're wrong. He blinked, caught off guard. For once he didn't have a retort ready. I stood, gathered the plates, and walked calmly into the kitchen. Behind me he muttered more curses from the couch, but I didn't flinch. I didn't look back, because I had already left that version of myself behind. And the woman walking into that kitchen? She wasn't afraid of him anymore. A few days later I officially filed for divorce. With Claire's help, we submitted a request for full asset investigation and initiated the process to freeze all joint financial holdings. It was a complicated series of steps, paperwork, documentation, legal protocols, but I followed it all one line, one form at a time. I didn't waver. Not once. After every meeting, Claire would give me the same quiet nod of encouragement. You're doing great. Keep going. She didn't realize it, but those words weren't just part of her professional routine. They were the first genuine affirmation I'd heard in years. Someone finally saw me, not as an inconvenience or a failure, but as a woman who had fought hard and kept standing. That day when I walked out of Claire's office, the sky was gray, low and colorless. But it didn't feel heavy. I stood at the top of the steps and took a long, steady breath. I knew the battle wasn't over. Gary found out about the filing 3 days later. That evening he stormed through the front door, kicking over the shoe rack in a fit of rage. His face was twisted, flushed with fury like a man possessed. You went to the goddamn courthouse? He roared, practically spitting the words. Are you out of your mind? Do you even know what you've started? I stood in the doorway to the kitchen, dish towel still in hand. I didn't flinch. I didn't run. I just looked at him. Calm. Steady. Don't act so composed, he growled, stepping closer. I swear, Alexis, if you go through with this, I'll make you regret it for the rest of your life. You already made me regret it, I said evenly. But this time I finally learned how to end the regret. He slammed his hand down on the table. You think hiring a lawyer's gonna scare me? You think the court belongs to you? No, I said, slowly drying my hands. But the law doesn't belong to you either. You just want to destroy this family, don't you? This family died the day you stole my paycheck and called it your right. His anger boiled over. He lunged toward me, hand raised as if to shove me aside, when a knock came at the door. Mrs. Sanders, our neighbor from next door. Her voice rang out loud and firm through the doorframe. Is everything all right in there? I didn't hesitate. Yes, thank you, but I may need to call the police. Gary froze mid-motion, caught between shame and fury. His face twisted, red then pale then red again. I stared him down. Go ahead. Try it. He clenched his jaw, then turned and stormed out, slamming the door hard behind him. The next morning Claire called. The court has accepted the case. The asset freeze was approved, she said, her tone crisp. Our next step is to file for a restraining order. Prevent him from selling off property or accessing your residence without permission. I let out a long, slow breath, sinking into the couch. We'll handle this step by step, she continued. What you need to do now is stay calm and prepare for the next hearing. I already am, I replied quietly. Gary hadn't expected the legal system to move this fast. 2 days later he tried to transfer the last remaining funds from my paycheck into his sister's account, only to be stopped by a judicial hold notice at the bank. I found out from a teller who said he caused a scene in the lobby before being escorted out. Then he tried to move furniture out of the house. I photographed everything and forwarded it to Claire, who immediately issued an emergency notice to the court. That same night he packed his things and moved into a friend's spare room. He was unraveling, restless, cornered, like a wild animal thrashing against the walls of a shrinking cage. But this time, I didn't fear him anymore. 1 week later the court scheduled our first hearing. I wore a simple charcoal gray dress, my hair pulled back neatly, and sat quietly beside Claire. I didn't dress to impress. I didn't wear anything symbolic. I just wanted to show up as myself, clear, steady, unshaken. Gary showed up too. But he looked nothing like the man who once strutted through our front door barking orders. His face was pale, his eyes restless, hands twitching with a kind of nervous energy that couldn't sit still. The past few weeks had clearly worn him down. He tried to appeal to sentiment. Said I'd turned my back on the family. Claimed I disrespected the sanctity of marriage. Said I was destroying his image as a father in our son's eyes. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend or argue. I just passed each piece of documentation to Claire, calmly, methodically, as she laid out the evidence. When Gary saw the transaction reports from my payroll account and the full list of his luxury purchases, something shifted in his expression. But it wasn't until the recordings began to play, his voice yelling, threatening, spitting venom into the dark, that he finally dropped his gaze. The courtroom was silent except for his words echoing through the small speaker. And when the last clip ended, the judge, stern, unreadable, jotted a few notes and said simply, "The plaintiff's petition is granted. Asset freeze to remain in place. Defendant will pay emotional damages." I stepped out of the courthouse into sunlight so bright it shimmered on the tiled steps. My shadow fell long and straight behind me, sharp against the stone. 1 month later I sold the house. The same house where I'd lived for over 20 years. The place that once held birthdays, dinners, holiday lights strung up across the banister. But now, it felt less like a home and more like a cell I'd served half my life inside. Once the court's preliminary ruling was in effect, I filed for a negotiated division of the property and pushed for a sale. Gary tried to resist, of course he did, but the combined pressure from the legal team and the judge left him with no choice but to agree. On the day the deal closed, I stood at the front door as the movers carried out the final chair. I felt nothing. No grief. No nostalgia. Just space opening up in places I never thought it could. The old payroll card was long drained. And the out-of-pocket payments I'd made during Mom's treatment still weighed on me like an unpaid promise. So the very first thing I did after the sale? I repaid every cent of that medical debt. Not a penny short. With the rest, I made a down payment on a new place. A small apartment on the edge of town. Not a great location. Not trendy. But quiet. Clean. And it had a balcony where the afternoon sun landed just right. The rest of the money I tucked away into a brand new personal account. My name, my control, my future. The new apartment was bare, walls unadorned, no framed memories yet, but I liked it that way. No lingering cigarette smoke. No echoes of shouting matches. No ghosts pacing the hallway. Just me. And a life I was building from the ground up. I cleaned the windows myself, made the bed with fresh sheets, and placed my mother's photo next to a simple white vase on the dining table. The sunlight poured in, catching the rim of a water glass, scattering soft halos of light across the room. I sat down, brewed a cup of tea, and drank it slowly. No one was stealing from me. No one was screaming at me. No one was standing in the way of my peace. For the first time in years, everything I had was mine. That afternoon the doorbell rang. I assumed it was a delivery, maybe paperwork from the lawyer, but when I opened the door I froze. It was Evan. He stood there in a charcoal button-down, holding a small bouquet of fresh flowers, looking uncertain, like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. Evan. I blinked, caught off guard. What are you doing here? He looked down, pressing his lips together before speaking. I heard you sold the house, that you moved. I just wanted to see how you're doing. I nodded slowly and stepped aside. Come in. He walked into the living room, eyes scanning the space like he was trying to piece together the new version of my life. He placed the flowers gently on the dining table and asked, almost casually, "Are you okay?" "I'm good." I offered a faint smile. More free than I felt in a long time. He was quiet for a moment, then asked, "So, you and Dad, it's really happening?" "It is," I said calmly. "The court accepted the case weeks ago. The final ruling is coming soon." He nodded like he'd already suspected as much, but hearing it aloud still settled heavily on his shoulders. "He didn't tell me anything," he muttered. "I found out from Mrs. Susan next door. I didn't ask what he was thinking, and I didn't want to bring Gary into this conversation. Not anymore. So, is that why you came? Just to confirm?" His eyes met mine then, more vulnerable than I'd seen in years. "Not just that," he said. "There's something else I need to ask." "Go ahead." He hesitated, then dropped his voice. "A few days ago, I went to see Claire. That caught me off guard." "You went to my attorney?" "I didn't do anything. I just needed to understand." He looked away. "She didn't tell me much. But she said I could look through the court files. So I did. And in that moment I knew. He'd seen the reports. The financial records. The recordings. The evidence. He knew now. He knew what I had never told him. That the woman he saw as distant and hard had spent years walking on eggshells. That I had washed dishes in silence after being yelled at, and rushed between hospital bills and job interviews with an empty bank account, all to hold together a family that had long since cracked. "I didn't mean to be so blind," he whispered. "I just didn't know. I didn't know what you were going through." My throat tightened. For so long I thought what separated us was a generation gap or miscommunication or the natural drift of growing up. But now I realized, it was the silence. The pain I never let him see. The burden I carried alone. "You don't have to say anything," I said gently. "I never expected you to pick a side. I just wanted you to live your life." He looked down at the table, his fingers grazing the edge. "When did you start doing everything on your own?" "The day I realized I couldn't rely on anyone else," I said softly. We sat in silence after that. Sunlight filtered into the room and then, like a whisper of childhood, he slowly slid his hand across the table, inching closer to mine. Just like he used to years ago when he was small and scared but too proud to ask for comfort. And in that moment I didn't cry. I didn't scold or cling. All I felt was peace. And something gentler than forgiveness. I knew we wouldn't fix everything overnight. There were wounds to heal, misunderstandings to outgrow. But that quiet reach across the table, that was enough. Enough to begin again. Because sometimes, a child sitting beside his mother again is the only apology that matters. Evan stayed for dinner that night, a first in a long time. We talked. Really talked. About things that mattered and things that didn't. About the past, the future, and the awkward in-between. And when he stood to leave, he pulled me into a hug, tight, lingering, warm. I walked him to the door, and for the first time in years I smiled without effort. Because in that small apartment with sunlight on the floor and quiet where there used to be shouting, I got to hold my son again. And I knew without doubt. The future would only get brighter from here. The next morning, I made my way to the Community Employment Center. I'd spent the night rewriting my resume, reframing my years of administrative work, polishing the experience I once thought too ordinary to matter. It wasn't flashy, but it was real. And most importantly, it was mine. The front desk was staffed by a cheerful young woman who welcomed me with an enthusiasm I hadn't felt in a long time. "We've got a few roles that might be a good fit," she said as she flipped through listings. "Office assistant, front desk support, warehouse records clerk. These positions are quick to onboard, have short training cycles, and are great for people getting back into the workforce." I nodded and chose to apply for a clerical position at a local logistics company. The interview was set for that Thursday afternoon. It was a modest operation, a privately owned firm with a handful of employees. The owner, a man in his 60s with a no-nonsense demeanor, glanced over my resume with furrowed brows. "You haven't worked in a while," he said bluntly. "You think you can keep up with the pace?" I smiled. I spent over a decade buried in spreadsheets and meeting notes. Those skills didn't disappear, they just sat quiet for a while. He didn't offer the job outright. He leaned back in his chair and said, "All right. Let's do a 1-week trial." I accepted on the spot. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't high-paying. But I wasn't chasing a title. What I needed was simple. A paycheck with my name on it. Earned, not granted. That week I woke up at 6, caught the 7 o'clock bus and was at the front desk by 8. I processed paperwork, entered shipments into the system, fielded phone calls and managed emails. The first day I almost logged the wrong client ID. The second day my supervisor told me my tone on the phone lacked clarity. The third day I stayed late correcting a mismatched invoice I should have caught hours earlier. But I didn't quit. I didn't flinch. Because with every task, every correction, every tired bus ride home, I felt closer to answering a question I hadn't dared ask in years. Who am I now? That Friday evening, just as I stepped out of the office into the warm orange glow of sunset, my phone rang. It was Jessica. "Hey," she said, her voice familiar and comforting. "How've you been?" I smiled without meaning to. "Tired. But honestly, I kind of like it. There's a rhythm to it that feels mine." "You sound different," she laughed. "I've actually been meaning to call. I have a friend who just opened a small handmade coffee shop downtown. She's looking for someone to help with operations, back-end stuff mostly. I told her about you. She'd love to meet." I paused. "I'm not really thinking about leaving this job yet." "No pressure," Jessica said. "She's not looking to hire immediately. He's just, like you, someone who had to build from scratch. I think you two would have a lot to talk about." I let out a quiet laugh. "All right. I'll meet her." That night as I returned to my little apartment, the wind rustled the maple tree on the corner, its leaves whispering through the dusk. I stood by the window and watched the last of the sunlight slip beneath the city skyline. And something settled in my chest, something soft and steady. Life wasn't suddenly perfect, but it had shifted. The path ahead might still be uneven. There would be missteps and muddy patches. But I no longer needed anyone to hold me up. I had learned to stand on my own. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. I could be my own light.
For the longest time, I thought my mother, Alexis, was a cold person. She was always too quiet, too reserved, never smiled much, and rarely showed emotion. As a kid, I gravitated toward my father, Gary. He was the funny one, laid back, always cracking jokes. She, on the other hand, spent her days juggling work and bills, running back and forth to care for my sick grandmother. She didn't talk much, and when she did, her questions about my life always felt annoying and intrusive. "Alexis is an idiot," my father used to say with a casual sneer. "Wasting her life on her mother, never caring about you." I believed him. Worse, I agreed. To me, he was the one holding our family together. She was just the plain, overly serious woman who seemed more invested in Grandma's pills than in her own son. I'll admit it, I started tuning her out. Her presence faded into the background. By the time I went off to college, she became just a faint voice on the phone. I'd rush her off with excuses, sometimes forgetting to call back altogether. The year Grandma was hospitalized, I came home and saw her for the first time in months. She looked thinner, worn down. She sat at the kitchen table, sorting through receipts. Her face was drawn, her hands trembling slightly as she said the words that stuck with me for weeks. There's still 30,000 left on the hospital bill. I need to find a way. I didn't say much. Back then, my mind was on summer parties and beach trips. I had no idea what 30,000 meant to her. No idea she'd already gone door to door borrowing from friends, pawning her jewelry, anything to get Grandma the surgery she needed. Then I found out, from a neighbor, not even from her, that she and my father were getting divorced. I was shocked, angry even. I couldn't understand. How could she just walk away? How could she break the family apart like it meant nothing? I confronted my father. He played the victim. Said she had changed. Wasn't the same woman he married. Said she was trying to be independent, like it was some kind of betrayal. Called her ungrateful, disloyal. And I believed that too. Until I went to see her attorney, Claire. At the time, I told myself I just wanted clarity. Maybe even to dig up something that could defend my father. I wasn't expecting much. But what Claire handed me wasn't an argument. It was the truth. Bank statements showing nearly all her income for years had been funneled into my dad's accounts. Audio recordings of him calling her a parasite, a burden, a waste. Written testimony describing how she quietly applied for a charity fund to cover Grandma's surgery, and was accused of falsifying documents in the process. Claire didn't try to persuade me. She just said one thing. You thought she was silent, but she's been carrying more than you ever saw. That night, I went back to school with a stack of documents in my bag and a lump in my throat I couldn't swallow. I couldn't sleep. Instead, I remembered things I'd forgotten. When I had a fever as a kid, it was my mom who carried me into the ER at 2 in the morning. When my winter coat tore, she stitched it by hand in the middle of the night. That toy I loved, turns out, she'd bought it with her saved-up spare change. All these years, I thought it came from Dad. I remembered the fun dinners, the road trips, the jokes. Dad was always the face of the moment. But it was my mom who paid for the meals, washed the clothes, packed the bags. I mistook her quiet for indifference, when really, it was her deepest form of care. When I finally went to visit her, she'd moved into a small apartment. The place was modest, but bright and spotless. A photo of Grandma sat on the windowsill, next to a vase of sunflowers. She was organizing spreadsheets on her laptop. Her table was neat, lined with color-coded notes, a ceramic cup, and a glass jar of pens. When she looked up and saw me, surprise flickered across her face. But she didn't ask why I was there. I struggled for words. Finally, I just asked, "Are you doing okay?" She nodded. "I'm good. Life's quieter now. Freer." I thought of everything I'd seen, the documents, the evidence, and my chest tightened. I didn't really understand you before, did I? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she brought me tea. "Understanding takes time," she said softly. "The fact that you came here means the world to me." I looked down at the tea in my hands. The scent hit me warm, familiar. I used to love the tea she made as a child, but I never told her. "Mom," I finally whispered. "I'm sorry." She smiled gently. "We're all still learning, aren't we?" I don't know if she forgave me in that moment. But I do know, I finally began to understand her. Not because of the evidence. Not because of the court case. But because I was finally old enough to see clearly. She wasn't dull or lifeless. She just buried her softness so deep we all missed it. She wasn't cold. She was always the one standing guard, quietly, steadily, without asking for anything in return. Years later, I still think about her calm, steady face. All those nights, all that weight she carried alone. No one defended her. No one stood beside her. But she never buckled. She was my mother. And she was the strongest woman I've ever known. I don't chase shiny illusions anymore. I'm no longer blind to the things that matter. Because now I know, the most valuable kind of love is the kind we overlook. And I missed it for far too long. But thank God, I still made it back in time.